if we do that. Now, I listened to some of my friends from the New Patriotic Party, and said, I can't help laughing when I listen to them. When I listen to them, I just can't help laughing. Said that, well, there have been some good things in the Mahama administration, but all of these good things came from Dr. Bawumia's ideas. Sana, Dr. Bawumia and the NPP were in power for 8 years. For those 8 years, his ideas didn't work at all. As soon as he left office, his ideas started working. What story is that?
Out of Kwasi Pratt, aba bonten, aba be fire Dr. Bawumia, any name crop for MPP for. In fact, they are trying to push some narrative B into the air, narration way, air jandam, of which me who send this if one who Kwasi Pratt ababe kasade fa ho obe observe abo hu sem MPP for ni din komo say oh ade a Mahama ye ni na no Bawumia hyase. In fact Mahama ne government ni koyie because Bawumia started process no to one Mahama to aso. According to Kwasi Pratt kira sansam na MPP for ne kanina na entro, they should bow their head in shame. No munja so mu claim glory of obiade awaye. And out of war, I think say the NPP moko to this level moko too much. Sa na mo buy into power. Na mo sasa institutions say Ghana ha and the university way no mo sasa di no mo dey ato omo party member din me kai pa say university ba ko omo sasa di ne no apia menkanti university. Ade boni ben afi de Mahama ade oye no mu pese mu claim say modia eno na Kwasi Pratt aba bonten ne oba be fire echichirim say sanka ye kan MPP for no omo say Ghana enti say ye kan mo asem kra they should bow their head in shame. Out of war yenhwe video no yenti Kwasi Pratt ne somebody to dwa na ma me hu so opinion e wo comment ni mo
that we are working with. Indeed, the 3-year IMF program is still the one in force. Okay? But something must have changed for us to get the results that we are getting. There's no paradigm shift. We are still following the neo-colonial, neoliberal path to development. And yet, the results are different. What is it that accounts for the result, the difference in the results? And I'd like to submit clearly that what accounts for this difference in results is discipline, a very, very high level of discipline in the management of the national economy. What accounts for this change is prudence in the management of public resources and so on. Now, with discipline and prudence in the management of public resources, look at the gains we have made over the last 12 months. Now, that should suggest to us that if we add a significant paradigm shift, this economy can really become robust if we do that. Now, I listened to some of my friends from the New Patriotic Party, and said, I can't help laughing when I listen to them. When I listen to them, I just can't help laughing. Said that, well, there have been some good things in the Mahama administration, but all of these good things came from Dr. Bawumia's ideas. Sana, Dr. Bawumia and the NPP were in power for 8 years. For those 8 years, his ideas didn't work at all. As soon as he left office, his ideas started working. What story is that? And they don't feel ashamed. They look us in the face and they tell us this. That yes, inflation has come down, the value of the cedi has appreciated and so on, but all of this must be attributed to the brilliant ideas of Dr. Bawumia, who was in office for 8 long years. The ideas of Dr. Bawumia must be very wicked ideas. The ideas don't like Dr. Bawumia. They didn't work when he was in power. When he left office, they started working. What is this story? In any case, Senna, look, let's look at the figures. Because the figures speak volumes when it comes to the microeconomic situation. MPP took inflation to 54%. They left office with inflation at 23%. If I lie, just tell me that I lie. Okay? They managed to take inflation, boom, to 54%. Then brought it down to 23%. At the time, 23 point something percent, at the time they were leaving office. Massa, within 12 months, the Mahama administration has brought inflation down from 23 point something percent to 5.4%. Is there a dispute about this? There's no dispute. Okay? No dispute. You come to the value of the city. They manage, through the brilliant ideas of Dr. Bawumia, to take it all the way to 17 cedis to $1. At the time they were leaving office, it was hovering around 15 point something to $1. In 1 year, one single year, the Mahama administration has brought it down to 10.4 to $1. And he said, nothing has happened. How can you look at this and say that nothing has happened? The national debt has fallen drastically in 1 year. And you say nothing has happened. But no problem. They then go on to say that, look, yes, it is true that some prices have come down. They mentioned petroleum prices and so on. But that electricity tariffs have shot up. Oh my goodness. My brother, go and look at the stabilization agreement that the new Patriotic Party government led by Nana Akufo-Addo signed with the IMF. They agreed that electricity tariffs should be increased. The decision to increase electricity tariffs was not made by the Mahama administration, but by the new Patriotic Party administration. And the records are there. You understand? They decided that the tariffs should be increased. Not just electricity and water tariffs should be increased. And this is because at the time they were leaving office, the power sector alone was indebted to the tune of over $3 billion. That was the level of indebtedness of the power sector. And in the estimation, that debt could only be retired by increasing tariffs. Okay? Now, we are being told by President Mahama that indeed this last stabilization agreement to the IMF should be the very last one and that we shouldn't go back to it. I hope he keeps his word. Because we've heard it over and over again. When Nana Akufo-Addo came to power, the promise was that we will never go back to the IMF and so on. At the time we were going back to the IMF, it was like a hurricane was pushing them towards the IMF and so on. So we've heard these statements over and over again, why they won't go back to the IMF and so on. We want to believe that. Now, Senna, I'm one person who has always indicated strongly that the microeconomic indicators are not a sufficient indication of the health of an economy. And I mean it. Because I've always said that these are statistical averages. And statistical averages do not tell the full story. So, for example, when you make the point that the gross national income has increased in a particular year, what are you saying? You're saying that if you put together all the incomes and you divide it by the national population, this is what you get. Now, it is possible, statistically, to have 90% of the population have declining incomes, with only 10% getting increasing incomes, and that could lead to a substantial increase in the you know. So these are averages. So for me, it is not sufficient to depend on these microeconomic indicators. They are indicators, all right. They tell a certain story, but they don't tell the full story. And that has always been my position. Now, there is this talk about unemployment. And the NPP's press conference said, look, the unemployment problem has not been resolved. How can the unemployment problem be resolved in 1 year when at the time you were leaving office, you signed a binding agreement with the IMF that public sector employment should be frozen? That the government should not employ anybody. You signed an agreement that the government should not employ anybody before you left office. The agreement is due to expire, I think, this month or next month or so. So how can you be expecting government to be employing people when you have already committed the incoming government to a program which says the government should not employ people? Senator, I cannot understand it. Maybe you can. I cannot. This is a commitment that you made that don't employ people. You see, there's a certain development that I'm increasingly getting worried about. We have trained a number of nurses, many nurses. Now we have come to the conclusion that our economy cannot absorb these nurses, and therefore we are exporting these nurses to other countries. What we are actually doing is that we are subsidizing other economies, because we have spent huge amounts of money to train the nurses. We've invested in the training of the nurses and so on. And we are giving them to other countries. It means that those countries will not have to spend so much money training their nurses. It's a subsidy to those countries. And I find that exceedingly repugnant. This exploitation of medical personnel is repugnant. It's repugnant because we need them here. Look, access to healthcare is very poor. The statistics are there. I don't have the statistics readily at hand, but the statistics are there. Access to healthcare is very poor. We need to improve healthcare in this country. We need to open more, clinics and hospitals. We need to open, what do they call them? Chip compounds and so on. We need to ensure that every community has a certain number of nurses and so on. We can deploy these nurses if we judiciously, harness and apply national resources. Okay? So I'm completely opposed to this senseless policy of exporting nurses. I mean, people in government today are jubilating because they are able to export nurses. It doesn't solve our health problems. It doesn't solve the problem of unemployment and so on. We need to be imaginative, more imaginative than we are, today. Sarah, what is the fundamental problem, fundamental problem confronting the Ghanaian economy? The fundamental problem confronting the Ghanaian economy is that we do not own our national resources, and our national resources are not being exploited for the benefit of the people of Ghana. That's the fundamental problem. And that fundamental problem has not been yet. And I haven't heard anybody speak to tackling that. One of my greatest disappointments in the work of the Constitutional Review Committee is that they went about talking about things that don't matter. Reduce the age of the president from 40 to 30 years. So what? What would that do? Add 1 more year to the term of the president. What problem does that address and so on? The fundamental problem is control of our natural resources. and how to exploit these natural resources for the benefit of the people of Ghana. If the Constitutional Review Committee had addressed this problem, I would be upstanding and applauding them, because they would have done something, provided a provision which would deal practically with a problem which is impeding our development. They didn't do that. Sana, many of us, I was going to say all of us, but I'm cautious. There are some people who don't agree with us, have come to the conclusion that Africa can only leap forward into a future of prosperity if we unite. African unity is a prescription for economic advancement. You know, it's a prescription for a collective self-defense and so on. This Constitutional Review Committee made no provision about Ghana's commitment to African unity. And I recall that in the 1960 Constitution, there was a provision in that Constitution which said that Ghana should be ready to sacrifice its sovereignty for the collective sovereignty of Africa. And so, it is not in this amendment. So what is this amendment that they are putting before us? You understand? Now, some have mentioned this Constitutional Review as one of the successes of the Mahama administration. Well, I don't know, you understand? But I'm going to raise a caution today. There are so many changes which have been prescribed by this Constitutional Review Committee, so many changes. Perhaps more than 50, you know, if you count, far more than 50 and so on. Now, if you have a referendum on a new constitution which simply says that let's go and vote yes or no, the result will be absolutely meaningless, because the changes are many. So if you vote yes, does it mean that you subscribe to all of the recommendations which have been made? So I want to see, if we have to go to a referendum which clearly spells out the different proposals, and citizens then have the right to vote yes for number 1 and no for number 2, and yes for number 3. That's the only way it will make sense. Because I've had the experience of 1992, or is it 91, when the current constitution was submitted for referendum. There were so many people who disagreed with so many provisions in the constitution, but they voted yes, because they thought that the constitution for multi-party democracy was better than a no constitutional regime, you understand? So we accepted many things which did not make sense and which are haunting us, and for which we are calling for constitutional review today. So if there's going to be a referendum, it must be properly, you know, organized. Now, Senna, we are talking about GDP. We are talking about national debt.